He was halfway through his pancakes when he said it. Just like that, no build-up, no argument leading up to it. Just his fork scraping the plate and his voice, calm and almost casual, like he was reading a grocery list. "I want to be honest with you," my nephew said without looking up. "You're my aunt. That's what you've always been. Not my mother. And I think it's time we both stopped pretending otherwise." I put my coffee mug down on the counter. I didn't slam it. I set it down quietly, the way you do when you're afraid of what might come out of you if you're not careful. "Where is this coming from?" I asked. He finally looked up. His eyes were steady. Too steady, like he'd practiced. "I've been thinking about it for a while. My mom wants me to move in with her and Brett. They have the space, and honestly, the setup here doesn't make sense for where I want to go in life." I looked at the boy I had raised for 14 years, the boy I had picked up from a hospital waiting room at 6 years old with nothing but a backpack and a broken shoelace. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms and call me by the same name the neighbors' kids called their own mothers when they forgot I wasn't one. I didn't say anything. I turned back toward the window and watched the maple tree in the front yard drop one yellow leaf, then another. "I just thought you should know," he added. The same words, always the same words, like honesty is a kindness when it comes wrapped in warning. "Thank you," I said. "I'll have some things to take care of myself." He blinked, surprised I didn't argue. But I had stopped arguing about things I couldn't control a long time ago. What I could control was everything else. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened the folder I kept in the second drawer of my desk, the one with his school documents, the insurance paperwork, the account numbers. I hadn't looked at it in years because I'd never needed to. Now I spread it all across the kitchen table under the fluorescent light and started reading like it was someone else's life. It was, in a way. It was the life I had built for him without being asked. My sister had been what our mother called a free spirit, and what I called something I won't repeat here. She had Connor at 22 with a man who lasted 8 months before deciding fatherhood wasn't his calling. She spent the next few years drifting in and out of Connor's life, sometimes sweet and attentive, sometimes gone for weeks with no explanation. I lived 40 minutes away, working as an office manager for a dental practice, divorced, no children of my own. I was 52 years old, and I thought the most dramatic thing left in my life would be deciding whether to repaint the guest bedroom. Then my sister called me from a parking lot in Tucson. She was with someone new, she said. Things were finally falling into place. She just needed a little time to get settled, a few months maybe. And could I take Connor for a while? He was 6. He had a stuffed elephant named Gerald and a habit of humming while he ate, and he had not yet learned how to tie his shoes. "A few months," I said. "I just need to get on my feet," she said. She wasn't on her feet for 14 years. I want to be precise about this, so that anyone who has ever told themselves that it couldn't have been that bad understands. It was that bad. She called on birthdays sometimes, late, after he was already asleep. She sent a card at Christmas for the first 3 years, then stopped. She came to visit once when Connor was 9, stayed 2 nights, left before he woke up on the 3rd morning. He didn't mention her for 6 weeks after that. When he finally did, he only asked if she liked the drawing he'd made her. I told him I was sure she did. I never told him she'd left it on the kitchen table. I was not a wealthy woman. I had a pension from 30 years in administrative work and a house that was paid off and a car that was 7 years old and got the job done. I did not have the kind of money that makes raising a child easy, but I had the kind of stubbornness that makes it possible. When Connor needed braces, I took on weekend bookkeeping work for 2 years. When he wanted to do travel baseball, I drove him to tournaments in 3 different states and slept in a folding chair at a Super 8 because 2 beds cost more than 1. When he got into a good 4-year university 200 miles away, I sat in my car in the driveway and cried for 20 minutes before going inside to make his favorite dinner to celebrate. He called me every Sunday for the first 2 years of college, then every other Sunday. Then, once a month, when he remembered. That was around the time my sister reappeared. She didn't call me first. She called him. I found out from Connor, who mentioned it the way you mentioned something you think the other person already knows. "I've been talking to my mom," he said one evening on the phone. "She seems like she's in a good place." I told him I was glad to hear it. And I was, truly. I had never wanted her to fail. I had never wanted Connor to grow up without knowing where he came from. But I also knew my sister, and I knew that her version of a good place had a way of shifting without notice. Brett was a real estate developer. That was the description my sister offered when she finally called me. Her voice, brighter than it had been in years, polished in a way that told me she'd been practicing. "He had projects in Phoenix and Scottsdale," she said. "He was different from the others. He was stable. They were building something real." I said that sounded wonderful. Connor started coming home less that semester. When he did, he was different in small ways. I kept filing away and pretending I wasn't. He had new clothes I didn't recognize. He talked about real estate investment the way 20-year-olds talk about things they've only just discovered and believe no one else has ever thought of before. He mentioned Brett more than he mentioned his professors. He stopped asking me to review his papers. One Sunday, he didn't call at all. I sent a text. He replied 2 days later with a thumbs-up emoji. The weekend before spring break, he called to tell me he'd be spending the break with his mother and Brett in Scottsdale. "They have a guest house," he said, "and Brett wants to talk to me about some investment opportunities. Stuff I could actually do something with, you know? Not just theoretical." I asked about his classes. He said he was figuring some things out. When he came home after spring break, he was quieter than usual. He spent 3 days on his phone. Then one morning at breakfast, said he was thinking about taking a gap year. Brett had a contact at a property development firm that could use someone with energy and drive. He could learn more in 1 year of actual work than 4 years sitting in lecture halls. I asked him if he'd thought this through. He said his mother and Brett had helped him think it through. I told him I wanted him to finish his degree. That was when he looked at me with that expression I didn't recognize on his face, patient and slightly distant, like someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. "You've done a lot for me," he said, "and I'm grateful. But you're my aunt. You raised me, and I appreciate that. But it's not the same as a parent's say. My mom wants to be involved in my decisions now, and I think I should let her." I said quietly that his mother had not been involved in a single decision of his life since he was 6 years old. He said that was in the past. I said the past was where the last 14 years of my life lived. He didn't have an answer for that. He just looked back at his phone, and I understood that the conversation was over and that something else was ending too. 3 days later, he sat across from me at that same table with the pancakes and told me I was his aunt, that's all, and that the setup here didn't make sense anymore. I made my list that night. I made it the same way I had always managed hard things, methodically, without sentiment, one item at a time. His car insurance was under my name and had been since I added him as a driver when he turned 16. The car itself had been a graduation present, bought used, paid in full, title under my name, transferred to his for insurance purposes years ago on my attorney's advice. The university tuition payment plan was managed through my bank account. I was the account holder on the family profile. He had never logged in himself. His health insurance was through my former employer's retiree plan, a benefit I had specifically maintained for an additional premium each month, so he'd be covered through age 26. And then there was the account I had opened when he was 7. Not large. I am not a wealthy woman, but steady, added to every birthday and Christmas, and every year I skipped a vacation or a new appliance or a coat I needed, and now it had 22 years of compound interest and enough for a down payment on something real when the time came. By morning, I had made 3 phone calls and sent 2 emails. I was finished before the coffee was done brewing. I waited until he came downstairs. He found me at the table with a folder in front of me, my reading glasses on, the posture of someone who has already decided. "I've made some adjustments," I said. "Effective at the end of this week, I'm removing you from my auto insurance policy. You'll need to contact your mother about coverage before then, or surrender the vehicle. He stared at me. What? Your university tuition payment for the fall semester has been paused. If you're taking a gap year, as you mentioned, there's no immediate need for it. If you change your mind and decide to continue, we can revisit. You can't just... Your health insurance will remain active through the current coverage period, which ends at the end of next month. I'm not going to leave you uninsured abruptly, but I won't be renewing the additional premium. He stood up. His chair caught on the linoleum and scraped a sound that seemed too loud for the room. This is because of what I said. This is because of what you decided, I told him. You told me I'm your aunt, not your mother. That's true. Aunts are not obligated to fund educations, maintain insurance policies, or reserve college savings for people who've clarified the relationship. You're punishing me. I'm adjusting to the new arrangement. Those are different things. He pulled out his phone. I watched him dial. I knew who he was calling. I got up, rinsed my cup, and left him standing in the kitchen. I heard his side of the conversation from the hallway. He was calm at first, explaining, then less calm. Then I heard him say, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" And the silence after that told me that Brett and my sister did not have a ready answer. He came to find me 20 minutes later. His expression had changed. The polished certainty from that morning had a crack in it now. My mom says she'll cover it, he told me. Good, I said. Then you have nothing to worry about. He waited for me to say more. I didn't. He left the next morning with 2 bags and a look on his face like he expected me to stop him. I watched from the front door. I did not stop him. I watched him load his things into the car I still technically owned and drive away. And then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet for a very long time. My friend Barbara called me that afternoon. Someone had seen my nephew's car in front of a different house. Word gets around in small towns, even small cities. I told her some things had changed. She said she was sorry. I said I wasn't sure I was. What followed was not quiet, though my house was. My sister called 3 times in 2 days. The first call, I answered. She said I was being vindictive and cruel. She said Connor was just a kid finding his way and I was punishing him for growing up. I said I was honoring the relationship as he had defined it. She called me a few things I won't repeat here. I told her if she believed I had acted unlawfully, she was welcome to consult an attorney. She hung up. The second and third calls I let go to voicemail. I listened to them once, then forwarded them to my own attorney, a woman named Constance, who had helped me with estate planning years ago, and who now listened to both recordings in full before telling me I had done nothing legally actionable and to keep documenting everything. My nephew posted something on social media. I don't use it much myself, but my neighbor's daughter showed me. It was vague in the way young people think is subtle. Something about realizing who actually sees you and who just wants to control you. With a picture of a sunset over a rooftop I didn't recognize. It got a lot of responses, some from his college friends, some from people he'd met through Brett and my sister, a few from family I hadn't spoken to in years. My cousin Sandra called to tell me she'd seen it and didn't know what to think. I told her she didn't need to think anything on my behalf. My brother, who lives in Oregon and has always been the quiet, steady one, texted me. I know what you did for that kid. Everyone who matters knows. I didn't respond, but I read it 4 or 5 times. 3 weeks passed. I didn't hear from my nephew directly. I kept my routine. I walked in the mornings. I had lunch with Barbara on Tuesdays. I started a project I'd been putting off for years, refinishing the bookshelf in the hallway, the one with the notches we'd marked every year on his birthday, the ones I measured him against until he got too tall and we stopped. I didn't sand those down. I worked around them. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was eating soup at the kitchen table. It wasn't my nephew's number. It was a number I didn't recognize from an Arizona area code. It was Brett. His voice was different from what I'd imagined, quieter, a little careful. He said he was calling to introduce himself properly, which struck me as late by about 2 years. He said he understood things had gotten complicated. He said my sister was under a lot of stress. I said I was sure she was. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said the project he'd been managing, the one he'd been planning to bring Connor into, had run into some significant issues. A partner had misrepresented his holdings. There were investors involved. There might be legal proceedings. He wasn't sure what the timeline looked like for the coming months. I set my spoon down. He said he hoped I understood that the plans they'd made with Connor were made in good faith, that they had genuinely believed it was all going to come together. I said I hoped the legal proceedings went smoothly. There was a long pause. He said he was sorry for how things had gone. I said thank you and ended the call. I sat at the table for a long time after that. I didn't feel satisfied. That's the thing nobody tells you, that when the thing you half expected finally happens, there's no relief in it, just a kind of tired clarity. My nephew showed up at my door on a Thursday evening 6 weeks after he'd left. He didn't call first. He just knocked, the way he used to when he was small and had been outside playing and wasn't sure if he'd done something wrong. I opened the door and looked at him. He'd lost some weight. His jacket wasn't warm enough for the temperature. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back and let him in. He stood in the hallway for a moment, looking around like he was checking that things were the same. The bookshelf was the same. The lamp was the same. The smell of the house was the same. I watched him take it in. We sat in the living room. Not the kitchen, which was where we'd always sat for the hard conversations. The living room felt more neutral. He sat on the far end of the couch and I sat in the chair across from him. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at his hands. Then he said, "Brett's company is being investigated. My mom is dealing with a lot right now. They asked me to leave the guest house for a few weeks while they figure things out. I said I'd heard there were complications." He nodded. His jaw worked for a moment. "She promised me a lot of things," he said. "She made it sound like everything was already in place. Like all I had to do was show up and it would all be real." I didn't say anything. "I know I hurt you," he said. "I know what I said at that table was wrong. It was cruel. I used words like a weapon because I thought it made me sound more independent. More like I'd figured something out. I hadn't figured anything out." I kept my hands still in my lap. "I know you're not my mother," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word. "You're my aunt. You've always been my aunt, but you were there every single day. You were the one who stayed. I knew that. I've always known that. I just stopped letting it matter because it was easier to pretend your love was ordinary." The room was very quiet. "I'm not asking you to fix it," he said. "I'm not asking you to pay for anything or take me back or pretend it didn't happen. I just needed you to know that I know what I threw away. And I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. At the notches on the bookshelf behind him. At the boy who was 6 years old with a stuffed elephant and a broken shoelace, and at the young man who had sat at my table and told me I was just his aunt. That's all. And at every single year, between those 2 points. "I hear you," I said. He waited. "I don't have an answer for you tonight," I told him. "Some things take time to untangle. Saying you're sorry is the beginning, not the resolution." He nodded quickly, like he'd expected that and was just relieved the door hadn't closed entirely. "Where are you staying?" I asked. He said he'd found a couch with a friend from college for a few weeks. I asked if he was eating. He half smiled, the lopsided one he'd had since he was 8. "Not great." I got up and went to the kitchen. I made 2 bowls of the soup I'd had left over on the stove, the same chicken soup I'd been making since he was 7 and had his first bad cold and decided it was the best thing he'd ever eaten and asked me to make it every time something went wrong after that. I brought them out and set one in front of him without a word. He picked up the spoon and ate. I sat back down in my chair and ate mine. We didn't talk about Brett, or my sister, or the gap year, or the car. We just ate soup, and the house was quiet in the way it used to be quiet when we had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. I didn't invite him to stay that night. He didn't ask. But at the door, before he left, he stopped and turned around and said, "Thank you." "Not for the soup," I could tell it wasn't just for the soup. "Come back on Sunday," I said. "We'll talk." He came back on Sunday. We sat at the kitchen table this time. Both of us knew we were ready for it. I told him clearly and without softness what coming back would mean, because trust is not a light switch, and I was 63 years old and done pretending otherwise. He would go back and finish his degree. Non-negotiable. I had seen too many people trade 4 years of education for a promise that didn't survive the first legal dispute. He would return in the fall, finish what he'd started, and earn the credential he'd worked toward. He would get a part-time job, not to punish him, but because I wanted him to know what it felt like to pay for something himself, to check an account balance and feel the specific weight of a number you built with your own hands. That feeling would serve him for the rest of his life in ways that no guest house in Scottsdale ever could. The college fund remained his, but it came with conditions now. The conditions were the ones he already had before he left. A passing GPA and basic decency. They had not changed, only the stakes had. And then the last thing, the one that wasn't negotiable at all. "You may not agree with every decision I make," I said. "You're an adult and you're allowed to push back. But this house and this relationship run on respect, not performance, not gratitude on demand, just basic human respect. The kind you would offer anyone who had been present for you every day of your life." He said he understood. I told him understanding wasn't the same as doing. He said he knew that too. We sat for a while after that in the kind of silence that isn't empty. He looked at the notches on the doorframe of the hallway, the ones from the bookshelf I'd moved years ago and remounted there when the measurements outgrew the shelf. He got up and walked over to them. He stood against the frame and looked at the topmost mark, the last one, from when he was 15, and we'd declared him officially taller than me and laughed about it for the rest of the afternoon. "You kept them," he said. "Of course I kept them," I said. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there for a moment with his hand on the doorframe, and I watched him and thought about all the years those lines represented. Every ordinary Tuesday and unremarkable Thursday, every school play and dentist appointment and nightlight left on in the hallway, in case he woke up and needed to remember where he was. My sister called once more, about a month later. The investigation had narrowed and Brett was facing civil proceedings from 2 other investors. Her voice was flat and small, the voice she had when she was standing at the bottom of something. She asked if Connor had reached out to me. I told her he was back in school. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I messed up. A long time ago. More than once." I said I knew. She said she was sorry. I said I believed her and that I hoped she found her way through the legal situation and that I genuinely wished her well. And I meant every word. Anger at my sister had never been the point. The point was Connor. It had always only ever been Connor. She didn't ask to reconnect. I think we both understood there was a different kind of work required before that conversation was possible, and neither of us was ready for it yet. Connor calls on Sundays now, without fail. Not because I asked him to, not because I ever mentioned the calls that stopped, or the months of silence or the Sunday. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji to a text from the woman who had spent 14 years making sure he never went without. He calls because he wants to. I can hear the difference. Last month, he told me about a girl in his economics class who had grown up partly in foster care and partly with an aunt who'd taken her in. He said it made him think. He said it made him want to call me. I told him I was glad he did. He's saving money from his part-time job. He's proud of it in a quiet way that isn't performance. He doesn't announce numbers or show me receipts. He just mentions it sometimes, the way you mention something that belongs to you. Last week, he said he thought he might want to put it toward something useful eventually, maybe an emergency fund, maybe a class or certification in something practical. He asked me what I thought. I told him that sounded like someone who was figuring it out. He said he was trying. I said that was all anyone could ever do. The maple tree in the front yard has started dropping leaves again. I watch it from the kitchen window some mornings while the coffee brews. The same window I stood at when he said those words at the table. The words that hung in the air like a sentence I was still being handed the rest of. Now, when I look at that tree, I think about the nature of things that shed and grow back, about how the same roots can hold something through every season, if they're deep enough. Mine were. I knew that before he left, and I knew it while he was gone, and I know it now, on a Sunday morning, when my phone rings at 9 o'clock exactly, and I answer it and hear his voice asking how I'm doing. Just that, nothing complicated. Just a young man calling the person who raised him to ask how she's doing. Like it was never a question. Like it was the most natural thing in the world, which of course, it always was.